Mind Over Matter, the space where timeless wisdom meets the quest for personal transformation. Today, we welcome back Marko Petrovic, best-selling author, spiritual explorer, and the visionary behind the Mara project, which leads transformative retreats to sacred sites across the globe. Marco's work is a bridge between ancient ritual and modern life, inviting us to rediscover the power of meditation, healing, and self-realization. This conversation isn't just about learning, it's about remembering. Welcome to the show, Marco. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Mhm. So, Marco, you speak of initiation as a gateway to self realization. In a world so disconnected from ritual, what does initiation look like today?
Yeah, it's a great question. Initiation for me is, well, something that I feel like we've been stripped of, generally speaking, in most of modern day society. I'd say the biggest initiation for, I mean, there's a few initiations that we go through just by the laws of nature. So, and those are, you know, being born. That's the first initiation that we all go through. And then uh, there's the natural maturation of the human being. So there's puberty, there's adulthood, there's elderhood, and then there's um, our final breath, and then death is the final initiation and that journey home. And in between that time, the initiations that we've kind of got access to, I'd say for women, the big one is motherhood. Like that's the big initiation that many women get to go through. It's a beautiful thing. And then outside of that, we don't really have too many others. Like we have primary school, high school, they can be seen as an initiation, but they lack ceremony and ritual to them. They lack a tradition and culture. So it's just kind of like you've gone through a stage of life and then you get a piece of paper that says, congratulations, that you've done this well, but that's about it. Whereas the deeper initiations that I feel that we're lacking is to honor the stages of life and the transformation that we go through. And what I mean by that is when I spend time with indigenous cultures, they'll go through hundreds of initiations in a lifetime. Whereas if we count the ones that I just mentioned, that's 5 to 8 initiations that we'll have in our lifetime. It's a huge difference, right? And with that huge difference, I feel like we accumulate a lot of baggage and a lot of mental, emotional, physical, spiritual stress that we end up carrying for many, many more years than what we should. And then we get to stages where people speak about something like the dark night of the soul. And to me, the dark night of the soul is nothing more than someone who has delayed initiation, whether consciously or unconsciously, for far too long a period of time. And now that the darkness has accumulated to such a point that they're overwhelmed by it and that it affects them so tremendously.
Absolutely. So, is there a moment in your own journey that felt like a true crossing point, a before and after?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the most recent initiation that I've been through has been writing my book. But it's not just that I wrote a book, it's that I devoted 9 months of my life to writing that book. So I lived it and I breathed it for 9 months. I gave all my energy to that project. And what I did at the start, during, and at the end of that was the ceremony and ritual practice that I found that's been profound for me has been spending time around the fire. So I spent a lot of time with some of the traditions from Mexico, and they have what they call temazcal, or in English they refer to it as a sweat lodge, which is a traditional. Um, it's it's a way of returning to the mother's womb. People say that it's a traditional sauna, but it's so much more than that. So yeah, you do get some hot rocks that are heated up on the fire, and then they get brought into a little structure where blankets are put over it. It's all in the dark, and then we put some water on the stones. But more than that, all of that symbolizes returning to the womb, returning to the memory of life, because the womb is where we began. That's where we learned uh, of this life before we started to walk. So we were breathing water before we were breathing air. And for me, that time around the fire, whether in a temescal or whether spending just a whole night around the fire under the stars, was a way of honoring this initiation that I was going through of writing the book. And right when I finished it, when I had my launch date set for my book, then I went back to the fire and I said thank you. And it was a way of honoring a cycle of work, right? So I went through this big transformation of writing a book, understanding what it means to write a really valuable book, one that's a masterpiece of my life. And then when it was all said and done, I went back to the fire that gave me the inspiration for all of it. And I said, thank you for this gift. And thank you for the opportunity to work for 9 months on something that I could pour all of my devotion into.
Mhm. That sense of stepping into a new version of yourself. It's something many feel but don't know how to name. You're giving it form.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel it's really important to give these things form because otherwise life goes on and we end up carrying these things that were something that was just a chapter of one's life, one can end up carrying for a whole lifetime. And like that's not the purpose of life. We're supposed to feel a sense of gentleness. We're supposed to feel a grace in life, like we're walking on clouds, the ways that the Buddhists speak about it. But many of us don't feel that way. And why is it? Well, it's because we don't give ourselves the time and space, or maybe even have the awareness of some of these ritual practices that are really important that allow us to turn the page on life and start writing fresh and start writing new. And I'm speaking for all the chapters of life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if someone goes through something really traumatic, a ceremony is a profound thing to do to honor it and to recalibrate oneself and to come back to the center of life. And if someone has a really beautiful experience, even for a wedding and things like this, it's still phenomenal to go and come to ceremony because a ceremony to me is nothing more than celebrating life. And sometimes when things happen that are a little bit challenging, we forget how to celebrate life. And sometimes when things happen that are really positive, we get caught up in the positive emotion and it takes us off the center. And so what I mean to say by that is there's a beautiful quote by one of my teachers, Dr. John DiMartini, and he said, the masses oscillate between positive and negative. The master stays centered and present in the center. So neither negative or positive emotions are good because they take us away from our center. And the purpose of ceremony for me was to always come back and say, no matter what happened, good, bad, or ugly, to say thank you and to come back to my heart, to come back to my center and to keep living from that place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, you have led pilgrimage to sacred sites through the Mara project. How do these places facilitate healing and self realization?
Yeah, these sacred sites are really like, I mean, they're temples. They're living, breathing temples. Some of them are mountains, some of them are megalithic structures, and they're temples that have been visited for countless of generations, thousands upon thousands of years, where people have prayed and received good fortune and guidance and transmissions to support them in their life's journey. So the purpose of going to these places is there's such a clear template of life and life force energy that when we soak in them for a little while and we marinate in that energy, we get to take a little piece of it home with us. And what's the benefit of taking a little piece of it home with us? Well, now we've been washed over with all this beautiful energy that sometimes words can't even do the justice to. But people know, like if they've been to a sacred site, there's something unexplainable that happens in the way that the energy influences us that supports us positively in our lives. And so taking the time not only to go to the sacred site, because like there's people that might go to the pyramids of Egypt, for example, and they'll take a few photos, they'll put it up on Instagram, and that's it. That's a very different way of going to a sacred site than putting down a prayer before you even begin and becoming really intentional about what you're doing and understanding that from the moment you decide you're going to go, you've engaged in a pilgrimage, and the pilgrimage is a sacred walk. And when you have that awareness, you start to see life, how it manifests around you, and everything is guiding you and supporting you on the way. So certain messengers will find you along the way. They might be people, birds, animals, trees, something you read on the back of a book that someone's reading. But all these curious messages start to guide you and speak to you. And that's the difference between like dancing in the shallow waters of life versus saying, yeah, I'm all in and I want to know everything that this life has to offer for me. And the beauty of making this pilgrimage is then when you arrive to this sacred site, to a temple, it gives you so much more because these places are a direct reflection of life. And as we know, to every action, there's a positive and equal reaction, right? So if every step I've taken to my moment of arrival to that sacred site has been intentional and I've been prayerful in the way that I've walked, well, I'm going to have a very different experience than if I just booked a ticket and went to Egypt so I could take a few photos.
Absolutely. So, can their energy be tapped into without physically visiting? Perhaps through ritual or intention?
Yeah, it can be. And there's layers to these experiences, like with anything. Like you can sit and meditate on the energy of Uluru in Australia. You can sit and meditate on the energy of Mount Kailash. You can sit and meditate on the energy of um, the some of the temples in the Mayan and Aztec lands. You can sit and meditate on the pyramids in Egypt. You can do that, and of course, you can connect to these energies. And it's one thing to connect to them, and it's another thing to walk through them and to marinate in them with every breath of your life. And so both are valuable, and it comes back to what I was saying about uh, the rewards of the karma of what we put in and what we receive as a result. So I can sit in my apartment or my house and I can meditate on it, and that's a certain degree of action towards connecting with that energy. And then it's another thing when I set aside time on my schedule. I set aside a budget. I put money towards it. I put all this energy and focus towards it. I plan my trip. I do everything so that I can go and visit that place. And both are incredibly valuable. And I'm not saying the one's more valuable than the other, but it's just about the laws of karma. Like there's an action and a response to everything that we do. And for some people it might be enough to just sit down and meditate on it. And for other people, it might be enough to go back year after year for 10 years to the same place because they've received so much beauty from it. That's what's happened to me over the last 5 years in Mexico. I keep going back to Mexico because I received something profound from some of the sacred sites over there. And I continue to go back because it's a relationship that we form, you know? And just like any relationship, if you don't visit it for a while, then it starts to fade. And I really like the relationship that I've cultivated with some of these sacred sites. So I keep visiting.
That's so powerful, reminding us that sacred space can be internal as well as external. So, ancient wisdom often emphasizes cycles: death, rebirth, integration. Why is it important for modern seekers to honor these cycles in their healing journey?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a trap in continuously seeking the next step without effective integration. And the conversation of integration is interesting because to say that one needs to integrate is to suggest that they are disintegrated at some level. And so I still look for the words to best express this theme of integration that you mentioned. And for me, what it looks like is usually when we go through periods of transformation, there's some kind of homework that we need to take care of. And what I've seen happen to some people is they get caught up in just more transformation, more transformation, more transformation, but they never do their homework. And then what happens is if you go to school and you keep going to new classes, but you never do your homework, well, then the information never settles into your system. You never get to keep and retain the teachings. You just witness them. And it's a very different thing to witness a teaching versus to live it fully. And so, what does it look like to live these teachings fully from our transformations? Well, it's going to be different for every person. But I'd say that whatever we've been through in our journey at some level, there's going to be very clear moments that speak to us that say that speak to us in the ways of inspiration that says, like That's my next step. And when we get this inspiration, it's very easy to look past it, especially like uh, the spiritual world can be very romancing because it's beautiful and the romance is stunning. The poetry of life is a beautiful thing to engage with. But the caution for me is to not get so caught up in the poetry that we get romanced away and forget that there's things to do in this life that are valuable. And so one of the great simple teachings is one of my good friends said this. He said, "Oh, you're enlightened now? Great. Go do your laundry. Go clean up your room. Go sort out your relationship with work and do those simple things." And then once we've done those simple things, it's like the flower of life, that pattern that just keeps flowering open in a beautiful way. Well, once we've taken care of the basics, it gives us a foundation to build from. And then eventually we get different projects that are of greater inspiration to us in different ways. And for me, one of those projects was uh, the Mata project of taking people to some of these places and uh, being a guide in a way for them to experience the beauty of life when we visit sacred sites and when we pay our respects according to how traditions and cultures have done them forever and a day.
That's amazing. So, what happens when we rush the process or bypass certain phases?
I would say that uh, life begins to open doors to us in ways that we could never imagine. So there's this interesting quote that comes to mind that says, most people live their lives based off of what they think that other people think of them, and they live in response to that. So that's a fascinating thing. So it's what it's saying is that I, if I'm living in that way, then I'm living in my illusions about what I think the illusions of other people are, and I'm living in response to that. That's a crazy thing to consider, and it's also true that many people do live that way. And so, what happens when we begin to trust is we liberate ourselves first and foremost from the mind. The mind will run like crazy forever. That's why they call it the monkey mind. No. And so, what happens when we begin to trust is that the monkey mind goes really silent because now it's in witness to life, and it's about being in witness to life as opposed to uh, being in witness to illusion. And when we're in witness to life and the way that it manifests around us, I, I call them like doors of magic begin to open because we start to live a life far better than what we could ever imagine. So we have the things that we imagine like, oh, this would be really beautiful and that would be really nice. But then there's the things that we never imagined that were possible for us. And somehow, in some curious way, by the workings of the great mystery, life allows us to experience some of these things. And I'd say that's what begins to happen. And in some ways, perhaps it's a vague answer, but it's vague because, well, it's vague and specific at the same time. The vagueness, or more correctly, the ambiguity, is around the fact that each one of us has a very individual path and journey to walk. And I couldn't for the life of me even detail my own, let alone begin to detail that of others. But what I can say is that more times than I could count now over the last 5 years since I made that decision in my life, I've been pleasantly surprised by the grace of the divine and just how well taken care of I am on the path, even when it looked like I wasn't taken care of.
That respect for the process, that healing isn't linear, is such a liberating truth for those in the midst of their own cycles.
Mhm.
So, how can someone begin the path of self realization in their everyday life without feeling like they need to escape to the mountains or a retreat?
Yeah, I'd say through self-analysis. And what I mean by that is um, to get to know oneself. So there's those beautiful words that say, know thyself, right? And knowing thyself is, so I found it very challenging for me because for a long time I thought I knew myself, and then I realized that I didn't really, until I was handed a number of questions that really helped me out. So our life is a living manifestation of our values. So some people might say, "Ah, like money is important to me, or family is important to me." But then when you look at their lives, they're not prioritizing those things. So, the typical example of the busy businessman who says his family is important to him, but never makes time to be there and always finds priority in being at work. And we can justify these things anyway, but it's not about justifying it. It's just about being real with where we're putting our time and attention. So if the businessman is putting his time and attention on business building activities, which is a noble thing to do to provide for his family and all of that, uh, but he's saying that he prioritizes his family, well, he's not doing that by the nature of his actions. So for me, understanding my values, what I began to do was to self-analyze through a number of things. One was, what do I surround my space with? Whatever's around me, that's what's important to me. When I look at my room, when I look at, secondly, the things that I spend money on. So what do I spend money on? That's a very clear indication of what's important to me. Thirdly, I look at, what am I most excited to speak about? So if I'm at a table with 5 people or 10 people, what are the conversations that I'm not that interested in? And what are the conversations that have me come to life where I could speak about them forever? And these are like little telltale signs that actually demonstrate what my values truly are. And for me, it's really simple. I'm fascinated by indigenous culture and living it. I'm fascinated by sharing that to people in the modern world. And I love traveling and seeing and exploring the world. And that's pretty much where all my money, time, and energy goes. It goes into travel. It goes into learning cultures from around the world, visiting these ancient sites. And it goes into deepening my learning and my journey and sharing that process in a way that feels exciting to me, which is right now through books, through podcasting, through some products that I sell, and through the Mana project. And each person can come to that clarity. And sometimes we might find that we're scattered, like we might be spending money on a lot of different things, or time on a lot of different things. But trust that through this process of self-analysis, if you give yourself 30, 60, 90 days to look at these things, then the information will become increasingly clear. And as it becomes increasingly clear, the journey of self-realization is about just prioritizing more time on what's really important to you. So if you've been saying for 15 years that you really want to meditate 10 minutes a day, but you still haven't started, and it turns out that it is really important to you, well, then start doing it. Um, Schedule the time on your calendar, even if it means that you sleep 10 minutes less today, and give yourself that space to experience what you've wanted to do for a really long time. I'm using a basic example here, but of course, this can be applied to anything that we do in our lives.
Absolutely. I love how you're making the mystical feel practical, accessible wisdom for anyone, anywhere.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the important thing to mention, that um, devotion is supposed to be practical. It's supposed to enrich our lives, not to add complexity and complication to it for 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 no reason. And so good devotion to me is exactly that, a simple, beautiful life that one is inspired by.
Absolutely. So, for listeners who feel disconnected from their purpose or sense of self, what's the first step towards reconnecting?
Take a cold shower, because that will shock you into life very quickly and give you a real state of clarity. And I know that most people would rather not do that, but the cold is a very clear reflection. It's an elemental force. It's a primal energy, and that primal energy calls us into attention immediately. Like if you get into an ice bath or you get into a very cold shower, you're not going to spend too much time thinking about how you haven't done your taxes yet. You're just going to be right there, and you're going to be present. So that gets us present and in contact with life. So that disconnection from self vanishes instantly. And then after you've done that, I'd spend some time meditating, because it's one thing to meditate, having come out of whatever your general routine is. It's another thing to give yourself the time to really literally cut through all the noise in the mind with something like a nice cold shower, and then to sit down and meditate from that state of profound clarity.
That invitation to pause and listen, to ask deeper questions, is the true beginning of awakening. So, Marko Petrovic reminds us that healing and self realization aren't about becoming someone new, they are about remembering who we are, whether through ancient rituals or mindful moments. We all have the capacity to step into our next initiation. So, slow down, listen deeply, and let your own journey unfold, one sacred step at a time.